In this video, we're taking control of element sizes, width, height, and different CSS units. Then we'll dive into 4 properties that actually make your layout behave responsibly. We'll open DevTools to see exactly what's happening behind the scenes, plus one really useful CSS function. So let's get started. Before we start, have you ever noticed the icons for our files? For example, CSS or HTML. They look pretty simple and default, but later, when we have more files and even different folders, working with them can get a little harder. And honestly, it can look a little ugly too. So for this, go to the Extensions tab and search for Material icon. Here it is. Install it, and you're good to go. Now let's go back to the main page. There we go. You can see that our file icons look much nicer now. You'll see the difference even more as the project gets bigger. Alright, here I want to build this card. So let's create a div and give it a card class. Inside it, an h2 for the card heading. Let's copy the text from here and paste it right here. Then we need a paragraph underneath, so let's add a p element and do the same thing again. Finally, let's add a button to the cart. Add to cart. There we go. Let's see what we have done so far. Yep, here is our ugly little cart. Let's move over to the CSS file. In the previous lesson, we talked about colors. Now, for example, I want to grab the background color of this website. So right-click and choose Inspect. You can try this on pretty much any website. We've already had a quick introduction to Inspect, but today we're going to learn more about it. Here we can see the HTML structure of the page. And when I move the mouse over each section, it highlights that element and shows its size right next to it. Now I want the background color of this website. Down here inside the styles section, we have all the styles. Click the element picker, then click on the area we are interested in. The body is selected, and here it is. Now all we need to do is find the color and copy it. It even shows the hex value right here. Let's go back to our website. Select the body, background color, and paste it. Now let's check it. Yep, looks good. Now let's get to the main part, the card. Let's give the card a background color as well, using the same method as before. You can use the same values I've written here, and again, background color, and paste it. Let's check it again. It's a little too light. Maybe the background color looks a little empty right now because we don't have the rest of the styling yet. With the other styles, this color will look much better, but for now, let's change it. Here's a question for you. Why does the background color stretch all the way across every time we add it? Let me open the browser. Alright, pay attention here. Our container doesn't have a specific width or height. Its height is based on its content, while its width fills the available space. A div naturally takes up all the available widths from left to right. Let's start fixing that. So let's use the width property and, for example, give it 400 pixels. Look at that. The width of our container is now much smaller, and if I make the browser wider, it still has a width of 400 pixels, so the width stays fixed. The card now has a fixed width of 400 pixels. That's the width property. In plain terms, it tells the box, be exactly this wide, no more, no less. Every CSS declaration has a property and a value. We spread them with a colon and end the declaration with a semicolon. The property tells the browser what to change, the value tells it how much. Width controls the size from left to right. But what about up and down? Right now, the card's height is decided automatically by whatever is inside it, the heading and the content. What if the height needs to be controlled too? So height to 500 pixels. And now the card has a fixed vertical size. With the current short content, it looks fine, just a slightly taller box. But what if the value is 02? you can see that it behaves just like it did when no height was set at all. Now let's add more content inside the card. And you can see that the height adjusts to fit the content inside it. The browser automatically calculates the height based on the content. Let's undo this and go back to the CSS. Now even if auto is removed, the card still behaves the same way. That's because the default value is auto. Let's set width to auto as well, so you can see how that behaves. And you can see that it takes up the available width again. And now, with Command Z, let's bring these values back to the fixed sizes we gave the card. Here we have typed 400 pixels and 500 pixels. So let's actually stop and talk about what pix really means. Now that you have seen it in action, pix stands for pixels, a CSS length unit used to define sizes like width and height. When you write width 400 pixels, you're basically saying make this box 400 pixels wide. So let's hop back into DevTools. Here in the Styles panel, you can see the CSS rules apply to the body. Here's our background color. Now if I click this little selector icon, I can click off any part of the page, and it jumps straight to that element in our code. And down here in the bottom section, we can see its CSS properties too, like the width and height for our card. Let's play around with it. I grab the height and take it away. Pull the width to, or even the background color. You can do this on literally any website. This is basically a sandbox for testing things. But just so you know, you're not hacking the site when you edit styles like this. These changes only happen locally on your browser. Nothing changes on the actual server. And here's the thing, the second you refresh the page, every style and settings snaps right back to normal. Let's click the element again, and there it is. The width and height are shown right here. Now let's click this button over here. This toggles responsive mode, so you can check the width and height of your browser's viewport too. We'll probably get into responsive design later, including how to make your site look good on desktop, tablet, and phone. But for now, just know it's there. Right here, it shows the viewport width, and here's the height. Watch, if I shrink this window down or make it bigger, you see the number up top shrink and grow right along with it. Down here, you can also test different devices and see exactly how your site looks at their screen sizes. For example, here's what my site looks like on an iPhone 16 Pro Max. Let's go back to responsive mode so we can drag the width ourselves. I'll shrink the browsers a bit. Let's close DevTools and take a look. Our card 400 pixels wide and 500 pixels tall looks totally fine on a big screen. But watch what happens once the screen gets smaller. And here's the important part about pixels. They are a fixed size CSS unit. 400 pixel is 400 pixel. Whether your browser window is huge or tiny, it doesn't stretch or shrink. It just stays at 400 pixels. Alright, I've shrunk the browser window down to something phone size. Even on this narrow window, our 400 pixel card stays exactly 400 pixel wide. Once the viewport becomes narrower than 400 pixels, and remember, our card is locked at 400 pixel. Watch what happens when I select it. See that horizontal scroll bar? On a small enough screen, the card looks way oversized compared to the viewport, and it's forcing horizontal scrolling. That's a nightmare for responsive design. So yeah, that's exactly why our card didn't adapt. Pixel is a fixed size unit. It doesn't care that the window got smaller. It's great when you need precise, pixel level control, but it doesn't adapt to the space around it. See? A fixed pixel width just doesn't adapt. What I actually want is a width that responds to the size of the space around it. Bigger container, bigger card, smaller container, smaller card. And for that, there is another CSS unit, percentage. Let's try setting it to 50%. Look at that. It takes up 50% of its containing block, which in this case is the body. And if I make the page bigger or smaller, our card's width stays at 50% of that available width. That tiny gap you see around the card, that's coming from the browser's default margin on the body. We haven't covered margins yet, so don't worry about the details for now. We'll get to it in a later lesson, but back in our selectors lesson, we used the universal selector to reset the spacing. And we are going to do the exact same thing here to clean it up. For now, just follow along. We'll cover the full details later. Alright, right now it's taking up exactly half the page. Let's jump into responsive mode. See that? Exactly half the viewport. And if I set the viewport width to 1000 pixels, what do you think our card's width becomes? Exactly 500 pixels. And the height still locked at the fixed 500 pixels. So what do you think? Should we set the height to 50% too? Let's do it. Think it's going to grab half the page height, right? See what happened? Here's why. Percentage heights are calculated relative to the height of the containing block. The problem is the containing block doesn't have a definite height here. The body's height is based on its content, so there is no definite height for that 50% to resolve against. That's why the percentage height doesn't behave the way you might expect here. Give the body a height and test it out yourself, but let's look at these with a clearer example. I comment out the card and comment its HTML too. Inside the body, let's build a new div with a class parent. Inside that, another div. And inside that one more div. I give the second div the class child, and the third one, grandchild. Now, in our CSS, let's grab the parent and give it a background color. Let's use the same one we're using here. Nothing's showing up yet because there is no content inside, but once we give it the width and height, our container becomes visible. Let's set the width to 500 pixels and the height to 500 pixels. Alright, there is our square with a fixed width and height. Now let's grab the child right underneath. I give it a darker background color. For the width, let's do 50%, and for the height, 50% too. What do you think is going to happen? There it is. Since the parent has a definite height of 500 pixels, the child now knows exactly what half means. So we get a 250 by 250 square. These colors kind of bugging me. Let's change it. Now if I set the parent width to 600 pixels, look, the inner square grows too, since its width is still relative to its parent. Now it's 300 pixels wide and 250 pixels tall. Or let's push it even further, to 900 pixels. And there's that horizontal scroll again, because the parent has a fixed width, while the child is still taking up 50% of it. Let's bring that back down to 500. Now let's do the exact same thing for the grandchild. It takes up 50% of its parent width and height, and in this case the parent is the child element. 50% of 500 is 250, and 50% of 250 is 125. So we end up with a 125 by 125 square. Now if I set the child's height to 100%, it covers the full height of its parent, and the grandchild still takes up 50% of its own parent, the child. Or if I set child's height to 100% too, it covers the entire child. The parent isn't gone, by the way. It's still there, but it's completely covered by the child. Alright, that's the basic idea. Let's head back to our card example. I delete these and uncomment the card. Alright, now I want to add an image to our card. I give our card a specific width and height, 300 pixels for the width and 400 pixels for the height. Now I create a folder called images. By the way, you can see that the color and the icon of our folder look different too. That's because of material icons which we installed at the beginning of the video. Now I put my image file inside it. And inside our HTML, I add the image. I set the src to the path of my image. And for the alternative text, you can put whatever you want. Now our image shows up at its natural size. Down here, we still have the rest of our content. Now, what do you think? Where did the background color go? It's hidden underneath the image. Now I want to give my image a specific width. So I select the image, grab the card class, and tell it to target the image element. Then I set its width to 100%. Right now the image is 300 pixels wide because it takes up 100% of its parent's width. But why does the content inside our card get pushed down like this? Because we gave the card a fixed height of 400 pixels. That height stays fixed even when the content inside becomes taller. So when the image becomes wider, its height grows with it. But the card itself doesn't grow to contain that extra content. The content simply overflows past the bottom of the card. That's the danger of a fixed height. I told the box you are exactly 400 pixels tall, but I didn't tell the content to shrink. Content doesn't resize itself just to fit inside a fixed height box, so it just leaks out the bottom. We'll fix this properly later with min height. For now, if I comment out a height, you can see that the card now grows to fit all of its content. You might say, okay, then I just give it a bigger height and fix the problem. And yeah, that covers all the content for now. But what happens if our paragraph gets longer? Let me copy and paste it. A little more, and again, just a little more. See that? It overflows out of its space again, unless you handle it with other techniques. For example, you can use these 3 dots here, which we'll cover later in the course. Or you can give your image a fixed height, so an image that's taller or shorter doesn't throw off the layout of your cards. Right now, we only set the width of our image. Its height stays proportional to its original dimensions. So, the whole image just scales down accordingly, but when you give the image a specific height, your images become consistent in size. Now I agree, the image might stretch or its proportions might get messed up, but I don't want to get into images, backgrounds, and all that stuff in this video. We cover all of that properly in its own section later, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and don't miss the upcoming videos. Alright, let's move on to another interesting unit. I delete these for now. We can't properly build some of things I'm showing you in the previews yet, because you don't have the concepts you need for them. And the reason I'm showing you these real examples is so that once you have the theory, you actually know where and when to use it in real projects. Alright, another div with the class banner. Let's say we want to build a banner for our website, something like this. Inside our CSS, I select it and give it a background color. Let me copy this color. And make it a little darker. So far, we have seen pixels and percentage. Now for a banner that needs to cover the entire viewport, which one do you think we should use? Neither. Pixels have a fixed size, so they don't scale with the viewport. And percentage are relative to the parent. Now we are getting into 2 new units, VH and VW. They stand for viewport's height and viewport's width. In other words, they are relative to the browser's viewport itself. Percentage is great, but it's always tied to the parent. Sometimes I don't want to think about a parent at all. I want an element sized relative to the actual browser viewport. Say I want a banner that stretches across the entire screen. For example, here I set the width to 50 VW and the height to 50 VH. See that? It takes up half of the viewport width, and this time the height works too. It takes up half of the viewport height. Last time, 50% of the height was based on the height of its parent, which was the body. But the body didn't have an explicitly defined height. This time, 50 VH is calculated directly from the viewport height, so the browser knows exactly what it's calculating against, from the top of the viewport all the way down to the bottom, and the same thing applies to the width. If I make the page bigger, the value adjusts with the viewport. For example, if I set the width to 100 VW and the height to 100 VH, the banner covers the entire viewport. Now, does that mean it covers my entire website? I mean, if I have more sections further down the page, does this giant box cover all of them? No. 100 VH means 100% of the viewport height. not the entire height of the website. Imagine I have a header above my banner. Let's use this h1 as our header. I bring in the h1, and that color is for the body, not the h1. Now pay attention. We get a scroll bar. It looks like the banner has been pushed down. Let's give the h1 a color too. And give it a height, say 50 pixels. Now the banner starts exactly after those 50 pixels, and then it takes up 100 VH. And when I scroll down, you can see that clearly. If you want to see this even more clearly, I add another h1 underneath the banner. We have 50 pixels for the first h1, then exactly 100 VH for the banner, and then another 50 pixels for our second h1. The first h1 is basically pushing the banner down. But I want the banner to start from the very top of the viewport instead of being pushed down like this. We can solve that with the calc function. Calc is a useful CSS function that performs mathematical calculations when the browser computes the final value of a CSS property. It lets you combine different units such as percentage, pixel, rem, VW, and VH within a single expression. So here I keep the 100 VH but subtract 50 pixels from it, because our h1 has a height of 50 pixels. Now pay attention. First, we have our 50 pixel h1, then a banner with a height of calc 100 VH minus 50 pixels, and with a little scrolling, we get our second h1. And that's it for width, height, and units like pixel, percentage, VH, and VW. We also learned a really useful CSS function. Here I have a form with the class form, and inside it there is an h2. Then I have a div with the class form group. Inside that there is a label and an input for the email, and another label and input for the password. And finally we have a button. Let's go into our CSS. Here I select the form. I've added these spaces here so you don't see the rest of the styling and get confused. For now, just pay attention to the width, height, and these two new properties we're learning. Here I give my form a width of 500 pixels. Wait, let me make the page bigger. Here, there is no problem, but based on what we talked about earlier, do you know where the problem is? Exactly. The problem happens when the screen gets smaller. Here, the form has a fixed width of 500 pixels, but the entire page is only 287 pixels wide. So what solution do you think we can use? Pause the video and think about it. What's a good way to solve this problem? Got it? Alright, let's get into it. Here I set the width to 100%, and as you can see, it takes up the entire width of its parent. Let's go to a smaller screen and see if our problem is solved. Yeah, now it fits nicely, but over here it's too wide. It takes up the entire width. Is there a property that lets us set both a maximum and a minimum? Yes. Here after the width property, I add max width and set it to 600 pixels. Let me make this bigger. You can see that our width is now 600 pixels. Now why is that? Let me open DevTools so I can explain it a little more clearly. Here the form's width matches the width of the page because I told it width 100%. But when I make the page wider, it doesn't grow beyond 600 pixels. Pay attention. Below 600 pixels, its width is 100% of the body's width. And above 600 pixels, it stays fixed at 600 pixels. The card now stops growing once it hits 600 pixels, even though the width keeps getting wider. That's max width. The largest width the element is allowed to have. Think of it as a ceiling. The element can shrink freely, but it can never go above this size. Width says try to be this size. Max width says never go bigger than this, and it will override width or a percentage if they try to go past it. Now the opposite problem. What if the form gets too small? Look, when it gets too small, the content gets cramped or starts overflowing outside the form. That's too narrow. The text is cramped. It barely looks usable. I don't want the card to keep shrinking forever. I want to say, shrink if you need to, but never go below a certain size. There is a solution for this too. I set min width to 300 pixels, for example. Now the form doesn't grow beyond 600 pixels. See that? It's 600 pixels. Below 600 pixels, it takes up 100% of the page width, so within this range, its width can change. But it can't below 300 pixels. That's min width and max width. They work exactly like their name suggests. Now for min height and max height, I have two divs with the class message. Inside each one, there is an h2 and a paragraph. Let's go into our CSS. I've given them a fixed width of 400 pixels, which you can see here. And I haven't given them a height, which means it's auto. So however much content they have inside, they grow to fit that content. Now what happens if one of our cards has more content? You can see that the proportions of our boxes get messed up. Now what if I give them a fixed height of 500 pixels? No, that's too much. Still too much. 300 looks good. Now our cards are the same height, even though one of them has more content. But we are back to the same problem we had earlier. The content overflows outside the card. So instead of a fixed height, I want them to have a minimum height. So I set min height to 300 pixels. Just like min width, this gives the element a minimum height, but it's still free to grow beyond that. So unlike a fixed height, the content doesn't simply overflow when the element needs more space. But I don't want it to keep growing forever either. So I add max height and set it to 450 pixels. Now, as our content grows, it can grow anywhere between 300 pixels and 450 pixels. A little more and a little more. Here, once it goes beyond 450 pixels, the content starts overflowing again, and we have already talked about this. Later, we can handle that in different ways, like using the three dots to indicate that there is more content, or hiding the extra content with overflow hidden, or even setting overflow Y to auto. So, the content can scroll inside the same box. You'll get fully familiar with all of these methods as we go through the course. In this video, the goal was to understand width, height, units, and min width, max width, min height, and max height. And when we build real projects at the end of this course, you'll get much more comfortable with everything we covered today. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Write your thoughts in the comments and support me by hitting the like button. See you in the next one.